think a nice place to start this evening's discussion is a message from Srila Prabhupada. As most of you know, Srila Prabhupada started the Hare Krishna movement in New York, and from there, different places in America and then in Europe and all over the world. So in the early days, the 60s, late 60s, people didn't know so much what yoga was. They certainly didn't know what bhakti was. So the New York Times, New York Post had a telephone interview with Srila Prabhupada. One of the first things I heard Srila Prabhupada say. The interviewer said, "Swamiji, you've come to America. You must have a message that you've come to deliver to America population. What is that message?" Good, open-ended question. Prabhupada's answer was 2 words. Know yourself. Pause. Reporter in a deep voice. Know yourself. And Prabhupada said it again, know yourself. It's a very simple way of saying what the chapter 2 message of Bhagavad Gita is. Before going into further teachings of yoga principles or understanding the supreme source of everything, a starting point is to know who you are. So know who you aren't and know who you are. Aham Brahmasmi, or your spirit soul, part and parcel of the Supreme, meant for service to the Supreme. So I picked this topic for that reason and for a few other reasons. You see in the painting, it's a painting of Plutarch. And he was chronologically after Plato, so he's considered a Platonist, a Greek philosopher. And he lived shortly after Christ lived for about 73 years or so. And he addressed this question in a way you're going to see in a very short TED Talk called The Ship of Theseus. You familiar with that? You've heard that one? Where'd you hear that one? Somewhere. Okay. Here's where I heard it in Beijing. I was very surprised. It was at a yoga studio, and I forget exactly what the topic was, but when the talk was over, first person to raise their hand, young girl, college student, her question was, what's your take on the ship of Theseus? I said, this is China. What do you know about the ship of Theseus? She said, we learned it in school. It's a thought exercise, you'll see shortly, that invokes the question, who are you? Or the persistence of identity, specifically. So that's what this topic is, embarking on a journey of self-discovery. Because yoga is a journey, yoga practice is a journey, self-realization is a journey. And here's the little TED Talk. You see across the top, persistence of identity. Persistence of identity. And here's how it begins. I hope the sound works. Yes.
Throughout the history of mankind, 3 little words have sent poets to the blank page, philosophers to the agora, and seekers to the oracles. Who am I? From the ancient Greek aphorism inscribed on the Temple of Apollo, know thyself, to the Who's Rock anthem, Who Are You? Philosophers, Psychologists, academics, scientists, artists, theologians, and politicians have all tackled the subject of identity. Their hypotheses are widely varied and lack significant consensus. These are smart, creative people. So what's so hard about coming up with the right answer? One challenge certainly lies with the complex concept of the persistence of identity. Which you is who? The person you are today, 5 years ago, who you'll be in 50 years? And when is am? This week? Today? This hour? This second? And which aspect of you is I? Are you your physical body, your thoughts and feelings, your actions? These murky waters of abstract logic are tricky to navigate, and so it's probably fitting that to demonstrate the complexity, the Greek historian Plutarch used the story of a ship. How are you I? As the tale goes, Theseus, the mythical founder king of Athens, single-handedly slayed the evil Minotaur at Crete, then returned home on a ship. To honor this heroic feat, for 1,000 years Athenians painstakingly maintained his ship in the harbor, and annually reenacted his voyage. Whenever a part of the ship was worn or damaged, it was replaced with an identical piece of the same material, until at some point, no original parts remained. Plutarch noted the ship of Theseus was an example of the philosophical paradox revolving around the persistence of identity. How can every single part of something be replaced, yet it still remains the same thing? Let's imagine there are two ships. The ship that Theseus docked in Athens, ship A, and the ship sailed by the Athenians 1,000 years later, ship B. Very simply, our question is this: does A equal B? Some would say that for 1,000 years there has been only one ship of Theseus, and because the changes made to it happened gradually, it never at any point in time stopped being the legendary ship. Though they have absolutely no parts in common, the two ships are numerically identical, meaning one and the same, so A equals B. However, others could argue that Theseus never set foot on ship B, and his presence on the ship is an essential qualitative property of the ship of Theseus. It cannot survive without him. So, though the two ships are numerically identical, they are not qualitatively identical. Thus, A does not equal B. But what happens when we consider this twist? What if, as each piece of the original ship was cast off, somebody collected them all and rebuilt the entire original ship? When it was finished, undeniably, two physical ships would exist, the one that's docked in Athens and the one in some guy's backyard. Each could lay claim to the title, the Ship of Theseus, but only one could actually be the real thing. So which one is it? And more importantly, what does this have to do with you? Like the ship of Theseus, you are a collection of constantly changing parts. Your physical body, mind, emotions, circumstances, and even your quirks, always changing, but still, in an amazing and sometimes illogical way, you stay the same too. This is one of the reasons that the question, who am I, is so complex. And in order to answer it, like so many great minds before you, you must be willing to dive into the bottomless ocean of philosophical paradox. Or maybe you could just answer, I am a legendary hero sailing a powerful ship on an epic journey. That could work too.
Okay, that's just, the purpose of that is to introduce the topic, persistence of identity, or the question, who am I? Let's see what happens here. Here's a pyramid with three pyramids making one pyramid. According to Bhagavad Gita, there's the self, consisting of body, mind, and intelligence. And the force that's animating all three is the spiritual dimension of who we really are. In fact, without the spiritual dimension of who we really are, the other three don't function, or there's no meaning to them. So, from Bhagavad Gita perspective, this is how I answered that young girl in Beijing. The persistence of identity is the unchanging soul that's within. And there's coverings of the unchanging soul within, and there's gross and there's subtle. Mind, intelligence, and false ego, you all know this is the subtle. And then the body is the gross, but none of them are who we really are. That's the ever-changing message from the little TED Talk. It takes introspection, which, according to Bhagavad Gita, is one of the characteristics of the mode of goodness. To even ask the question, what to speak of, get closer to the answer to the question, who am I? One needs to look within to find the answer. The image is meant to show seeing Paramatma within, ultimately through yoga practice. Here's a verse from Bhagavad Gita, many of you may be familiar with. Indriyani paranyahur, indriyebhya para manaha. The verse translates, the working senses, the indriyas, are superior to dull matter. Para. Superior to dull matter. And higher than the senses, is the mind. Indriyebhya param manaha. And then the mind, higher still than the mind, is buddhi, or intelligence. And higher than intelligence is the soul. So the soul is that animating factor of life. Without the animating factor of life, the body disintegrates. It's no longer a body, it's back to the elements in course of time. In his Srimad Bhagavatam commentary, Prabhupada describes a lady who is very interested in taking nice, good care of her birdcage, so much into taking good care of her birdcage, she neglects the bird inside. And neglecting the bird inside, the bird can croak and finish. So he calls this the cage polishing civilization, without making that differentiation between deha and dehi. Deha is the body and dehi is the occupier of the body. Without making that clear distinction, then civilization is simply on the bodily platform or the material platform. In the course of my studies of this question, I came across a book, so I'm going to describe a little bit what the book is about. There's a cardiologist at Emory University who wrote a book. I forget what he called the book, the title. But in the book he describes one time when he was performing open heart surgery. They put the patient under anesthesia and they hooked the patient up to different machines to see if their heart was beating or stopped beating and so forth. If their brain waves were still moving. So at a certain point, the heart stopped. So they have a procedure in case the heart stops. I don't know the best way to describe it, but they put some kind of electrodes or it's a device on the chest of the person that simulates a charge that then can artificially cause the heart to move or pump, and then eventually it can kickstart and the heart can start up again. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. So when this patient had cardiac arrest means the heart's not working, so blood doesn't go to the brain. So the instrument showed the electrical activity in the brain went flat. The heart stopped beating, so officially the person is dead. And so they did the procedure, and at the end, the patient survived. And the next day or so, the doctor went to see the patient and do his bedside manner activity with the patient. How's it going? And then the patient described to him not only how he felt, but he described to him an experience when he was on the operating table. And the painting shows what his experience was. He experienced floating up above the operating table, looking down upon the operating table, and hearing the nurse say to the doctor, their heart stopped and the EKG stopped. And so then the doctor told the assistant, bring out those devices and place it on his chest, etc., etc., etc. And then the heart stopped, or the heart started again. So what this means is, relevant to our topic, who am I? The seat of consciousness is not the electrochemical activities in the brain, because that stopped. And the person that reported that it stopped was observing from up above in detail visual acuity, audio acuity, memory retention, consciousness. Just like the Bhagavad Gita verse, consciousness is above the intelligence, above the mind, and above the senses, and above matter. So the seat of consciousness is something else. That's the message. And the doctor writes, when he heard this from his patient, he was like, how is this possible? And so he began researching, and he asked other doctors had they had similar experiences, and he started chronicling similar experiences. It's called an out-of-body experience. They have an acronym for it, OBE, out-of-body experience. And so he wrote a book about his and other medical doctors reporting out-of-body experiences with their patients where, let's say it again, the body dies, the brain stops, the nervous system stops, the electrochemical activity in the brain stops, the heart stops, they're dead. Signs, symptoms of death. And they survived. And they reported their experience during that cardiac arrest period of time. So he, at the end of his book, he wrote, I'm reluctant to say this, but I can't help but reach the conclusion that there's some conscious entity within every body that's different than the body, which is what it points to. So I got a little interested. I read a couple more. Here's one that I found particularly interesting. The other side of the country, University of Washington, School of Medicine, Dr. Kimberly Clark Sharp. Similarly, cardiologist, open heart surgery, and she had something similar but different happen. And there's all kinds of out-of-body experience accounts. So what she reported was, in her book, that one of her patients the next day survived cardiac arrest. The procedure was described, and the patient said they not just hovered above the operating table, but they floated across the ceiling. They went out an open window. They went up 3 floors, and found themselves looking inside a janitor's closet 3 floors up. And they described what was in the janitor's closet. And then they described there was a little ledge outside the janitor's closet. On the ledge outside the janitor's closet was a pair of sneakers with a little rip in one of the toes and different colored shoelaces in those pair of sneakers. And then they floated back and went back into their body and they survived. So when Dr. Sharp heard this, he had similar reaction. What's this? So she went to the janitor 3 floors up and asked the janitor, could you describe to me what's in that janitor's closet? He said, described, matched, the description matched. He said, but nobody could get in there because I have the key. This is a hospital. I don't let people in my janitor's closet. And sure enough, outside the ledge, there was a pair of sneakers with a ripped toe and unmatching shoelaces with a little rip. And you can't see that from inside. You can only see it from outside. Now, they were able to see it from above, looking down. But how did this patient have the vantage point? Because he was, as he said, floating up 3 flights, looking inside the janitor's closet. So consciousness is different than the body. They're 2 entities. Because the presence of the conscious entity, the soul, the body is animated and appears to be conscious. And when the soul leaves the body is no longer conscious. No, the body is no longer showing symptoms of consciousness unless the soul re-enters the body, which is unusual. But out-of-body experiences permit that to happen sometimes. And there's many, many, many varieties, but I thought these were particularly interesting because the persons who were examining them weren't quacks, they're doctors, medical doctors with their profession on the line to write the kind of things that they wrote. So I take it that they're credible reports from credible witnesses, and the main point is, on our topic, who am I? We're the living entity that's within the body, and we're the conscious living entity. And consciousness emanates from within. Now, in Scripture, there's a nice Upanishadic reference that says, consciousness lights up objects like pots and plates. You know, Upanishads are very cryptic sometimes, and you have to ponder on what's being said. When I came across that statement, I got an answer to a question that I heard Srila Prabhupada say, the living entity is both conscious and consciousness. And when I heard it, I thought, that sounds cool, but what does it mean? The living entity is conscious and consciousness. I'll say it one more time. The living entity is conscious and consciousness. So it's the example like shown here, like a lamp. In a lamp, there's light when it's lit, and that light lights up objects in the room like pots and plates. That light spreads from, it's because it's luminous. So consciousness also spreads because it's this conscious entity. So we're conscious and consciousness, and that's who we are, the jiva. And jivas have a nature where they can have a relationship with another jiva, or the expression goes, a soul-to-soul relationship. Is it possible? Here's how it's possible. The painting or drawing is a Chinese man. He looks like a nice man. He's a little old, and he has a little beard, and he has a friend. and the friend is old like him, he has a little bit bigger beard, and they have some things in common besides they're Chinese. One of them is he has a soul within the body, and the other gentleman, he has a soul within the body, but souls are individual, and so this soul and that soul are different, but they're both jivas or souls. And there's something that's additionally similar. They both have the super soul within the heart of each of the individuals. And the way, according to Scripture, the way to have a soul-to-soul relationship is through the via media of the super soul. So our connection with one soul and another soul is through the medium, via media, of the super soul. We're connected that way. A soul to say same thing in a different way. How to have a soul-to-soul relationship is becoming conscious of the Supreme Soul that's within another soul, and recognizing the Supreme Soul within the other soul that's the same Supreme Soul that's within this body. That's the soul-to-soul relationship facilitated. And I like images, so I'm going to say the same thing in a different way. Here's an image of an eggshell with a little crack in the eggshell, and you see light spreading out through that crack in the eggshell. That's, for me, that's the consciousness is within, and the consciousness may extend, just like we're seated in the same room. So because of light and the ability of the eye to see objects, we can see one another. So that's like this. And then gradually, through self-realization, is expand that opening, and eventually, like the out-of-body experience, the seat of consciousness is something other than the covering. And self-realization means to be able to achieve that status. I'm spirit soul. This is the who am I question from the very beginning, for those who came a little bit later. I'm the spirit, I'm the conscious self within. I do have a body, I do have a mind, I do have an intelligence, I do have a false ego. Those are coverings, and it's not who I am. And I can identify with who I'm not, or I can understand who I am and try to live my life that way, using the body in the proper manner. Another way of approaching the same topic is how are we different, like artificial intelligence, or any of those kinds of experiments, making a robot that replicates and duplicates man or a person. The distinction is consciousness. So once upon a time, when I started developing this system of teaching, I had somebody build me a plexiglass light machine. So I carried it around, went to classrooms and put it on the table, and people were fascinated because it's technology, so you get fascinated. What's this technology going to do? So what the technology did is there's a little button on the top. When I pressed the button on the top, it sent a signal for a light to show on a light-sensitive machine, and then the machine, seeing the light, would send out a tape, a ticker tape kind of thing, and it would say, I see a red light. So I demonstrate, I'm just doing that visually this way, but it worked. Because the machine can report, I see a red light, but where's the conscious experience of light? There's no conscious experience. It's a mechanical response, yes. And so robots or machines can replicate behaviors, but where's consciousness besides behaviors? That's the who we are. There's behaviors that are animated by the life force within. And when the life force leaves the body, if you don't press that button on the top, it doesn't say, I see red light. Nor is there an experience even when you press the button. You get the idea. Another approach, the same thing. In a laboratory, it's possible to analyze what are the medical or chemical constituents in the body. So that's been done, and this is what they found. In the body, there's enough iron to make 6 small nails, a lot of carbon, 900 pencils, enough sugar to sweeten 10 cups of coffee, potassium to fire a toy cannon, and some other things. Lime and fat, you can make 7 bars of soap. And phosphorus, 20 matchboxes. And water, fill a 10-gallon tank. And a little this and that and the other, trace elements. So if you wanted to go to a chemical place and buy that much of all those elements, it would cost you around $20. And you can put that $20 worth of stuff together and make a human body. But that's not how you get a human body. And the worth is different than $20. Or if there's a BMW wreck, and maybe it's valued, depends, $50,000, or the person who was in the car, you can replace the $50,000, but you can't replace the person that was in the car. So which is more valuable? It's the life within, that's the message. And another drawing I like very much, that fellow sitting with his back to us, that's us, and over on the left side is birth, and over on the right side is death, and in between is life. So what goes in that space? That's the who am I question, asked in a different way. What's my mission in life? What's the purpose of this human form of life? And depending on how you answer, that's what goes in that space. Supposing you don't ask the question, then anything can go in that space. But that's not who you are. Who am I? Am I truly happy? What is my goal of life? What is this human form of life meant for? Where do I go after this body is finished? So as you know, these are topics that are discussed in Bhagavad Gita, starting with chapter 2. Dehinosmin yata dehe komaram yovanam jara, etc. Going back to the TED Talk, and it's an age-old question, not just Plutarch asked the question. It was asked long before Plutarch was around. It's a question that was asked in Bhagavad Gita. Here's a nice painting. This is showing Sanatana Goswami. Sanatana Goswami is the eldest amongst the 6 Goswami followers of Lord Chaitanya. He was born in a Saraswat Brahmin family, highly learned, highly qualified in all ways. He left that lifestyle. He was the prime minister under the Muslim ruler Nawab Hussain Shah. He left all of that, came in a mendicant attire to Lord Chaitanya and asked 2 questions. Who am I? And why do the threefold miseries always give me trouble? Tapatraya. Tapatraya. Why? Why do I have to undergo things I don't want to undergo? There's a force controlling me, and I don't even know who I am. So that was how their conversation began. And, it's a very wonderful section of Chaitanya Charitamrita if you're interested to read. Now, just one other thing, and I'm going to close. I forget when it was, January or something like that, I was in Singapore. It's a nice time to be in Singapore because weather's nice there all the time, but it's more mild in January. It gets really hot in the summer like here. So there's a very successful businessman, disciple of Radhanath Maharaj, named Radha Giridhari, lives in Singapore, and he has formed a group of people that discuss spiritual topics, and he has a nice name for it. He calls it the Artha Forum, as in Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Artha meaning, in that sense, means economic development. Dharma, Artha, economic development. So, Artha Forum. So, I suggested, although these are very successful people, obviously intelligent people, very learned people, but so is Sanatana Goswami, successful, learned, and very capable. But asking, I presented this very same topic to them, and the discussion was pretty lively, because these people are not just entrepreneurs and successful arthabadis, they're thoughtful people, inspired in part by Radha Giridhari's association, but they're spiritually minded as well. So it was a very nice discussion. I picked this topic for this group for similar reasons. I was told there's some persons that are medical doctors, and you may be interested to hear these out-of-body experiences and how doctors that were performing their open heart surgery operations assessed the situation when their patients reported. And overall, this mission of human life, sometimes, I found this to be true for myself during my, a little sharing. When I was very young, I used to ask these kinds of questions, but I didn't get any answers. I'll be very specific. When I was young, I grew up in a Christian family, and I went to Sunday school like kids go to, our Sunday school. And I learned from the Sunday school about heaven. So I asked Mom and Dad, what's it like there? What do people do when they go to heaven? What's the travel advertisement? What's the marketing program for going to that place we're supposed to want to go to? What's it like there? And they didn't have an answer. They didn't say, I don't have an answer. They just patted me on the head and said, oh, isn't that cute? So I went to the priest, and he didn't have an answer, and I couldn't find answers. So I got busy doing what I was supposed to do, be successful. Because be successful doesn't mean you ask those questions. You do well in school, do well in your social and young boys, athletic and this and that, and I was on the road to being successful because that's what you're supposed to do. And then at some point in time, a little light went on, and I started asking those questions again. And when I started asking those questions again, I didn't get answers again. And that was disturbing, because here I am on the road to being successful, and I don't even know who I am. Something's wrong with that picture. What's important to me, besides being successful and the standards of what I'm told is being successful looks like? And it didn't match. Anyway, so I went on a journey of asking that, and the 999 other questions that come along with that question. I'm encouraging the same thing that Vedanta Sutra encourages. When you receive the human form of life, a sign that you've reached the human form of life, not just a two-legged animal, but a human form of life, is you ask those questions until you get answers. Atato Brahma Jigyasa in the Vedanta Sutra language. Inquisitiveness. And keep asking, and you refine the response to the question, and refine, and through association with sadhu and association with Shastra, you'll get some little more clarity, and keep going, and that's why I chose this topic. I had a nice lesson from Singapore in the Arta Forum, is thoughtful people, although they're busy being successful, they also ask these questions in a meaningful way. So I'm hoping we'll get that kind of response this evening. Any comments or questions? Yeah. Here.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. I have two questions. One is about the soul is conscious and consciousness. Is that still at the kind of Sankhya philosophy level of analysis
yes.
and not taking the step further?
Yeah, it can go further, but it's certainly a Sankhya point. For those not familiar, what does that mean? Sankhya means the analysis of matter and spirit. Over here, categories of matter. Over here, categories of spirit. So we fall in the category of spirit, and spirit symptom is consciousness. Matter doesn't have the symptom of consciousness, just like the light machine. You can have the behavior that says, you can get a machine that says it, not just a little tape comes out, prints out from a machine. You can say, I see a red light, when a red light is shown. You can get that behavior. A voice, something, simulator. But where's the conscious experience? That's Sankhya. And they're not the same. They're distinct. So it's a Sankhya point. And then you can take the Sankhya point and go further with it. You know, the individual consciousness and then another individual consciousness, and how do they relate, one consciousness and another consciousness, and supreme consciousness, and how do they relate with supreme consciousness. So there's further advancement of the Sankhya teachings. Those of you that have an interest in that pursuit, it's right in Canto 3, Srimad Bhagavatam, Teachings of Kapila Dev. He does it. Starting in chapter 26 of Canto 3. You can find all about this question. Consciousness, and then consciousness of the Supreme, the relationship between the individual and the Supreme Consciousness, just in Sankhya terms. And then it leads to devotional service.
So a second part of the same question is because, so one answer going back to the ship of Theseus is because identity is associated with a consciousness who can perceive that identity. Mm-hmm. The question about the ship, which is matter, is really irrelevant. I mean, depends on how you define it. You can say this or that, but there's no right answer.
Yes, exactly. You know, like the parts of the body change. Our entire body changes. Anyway, here's something I learned from medical science, because I was in pre-med. According to medical science, all the cells of your body change every 7 years. How old are you?
19.
Huh?
19.
19. So you've had almost 3 complete different bodies. When you're 21, the bell will ring and you'll have your 3rd complete change of body. But there's still you, the conscious entity within. So as all the parts change, there's the persistence of identity. This is me, that's me, that's me. So we say growing, but more specifically, more scientifically, the body is changing. Incrementally, so that we don't notice, so we call it growing. But the cells of the body are being eliminated and other cells replaced. Those cells, a complete set every 7 years, and gradations in between. So the body is changing, but the self is staying the same. Now, the body may very well, it does condition consciousness. A little baby doesn't have the same experience or the same everything as when they're 7 and when they're 14 and when they're 21. The consciousness exhibits itself through the medium of matter, but the conscious self is the same conscious self.
The second is more a request to discuss, for you to explain more the notion of soul-to-soul relationship through the via medium. Are we talking something more than material relationships that we have?
Yes. There's physical, the different relationships based upon physical. A family. It's physical. But where was it's like this? The story of Chitraketu. During Chitraketu had a son, whose son died, and Narada came, and Narada invited the son, "Please come back and be with your father. He's missing you." And the boy sat up and said, "Please tell me, who is my father? Because I've had so many lives. Is this my father, or the one before, or the next one? And where I've gone was with my eternal father. You want me to come back here and be with my father? But I'm with my eternal father." And he laid back down. Chitraketu was astonished. And a very powerful lesson. So, there's body-to-body relation, son and father, or husband and wife, or friend and friend, and so on. Body, mind, emotion, bond of emotion between one friend and another friend. But it's all on this changing, ever-changing platform. And how to have a relationship that's not in the ever-changing platform, that's soul-to-soul. How do you have a soul-to-soul relation? I'm just expanding on the concept. It has to be on the spiritual platform. And to be on the spiritual platform, there has to be a connection with the Supreme Spirit. And then that's the via media. I can't know who I am apart from the Supreme, because I exist as a part of the Supreme. So I can't really know who I am apart from the Supreme, because there's no existence apart from the Supreme. It must be in relation with the Supreme, and to see another in relation with the Supreme. So that's the via media part. And is it possible? It's certainly possible. Within a family or within persons, to see, relate to one another. Yes, in terms of the body, the covering of the soul, and you appropriate to the covering, you relate. But the real self is not the covering. So appropriate to the covering, you relate, but the real person is the soul within. And it's possible, it's ideal, it's yoga to see on that platform, Pandita Samadarshana, on the platform of the soul, through the media, via media, the super soul, the Supreme. It's elevated, but it's food for thought. A little different than going along with life and not asking any of these questions. One can do that, but it's good to ask these questions. Yes.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, very nice topic. When we discuss about this soul topic with anybody, generally...
Hold it a little further away because it's too much. Go ahead.
When we discuss this topic about, especially about the soul, challenging questions comes. Can you show? Because, if I see, I can believe. That kind of, the crass questions comes. Could you please give more?
By symptoms. Have you seen an electron?
No.
Do electrons exist? We know there's electricity, and we know when there's not electricity. Welcome to Houston. And when there is electricity, it does something. So you know when the electricity is on because it does some work. According to the engineering design, electrons can make something hot or cold, etc., etc. So by the symptoms, we know electricity is present or not present. By symptoms, we can know that the soul is present or not present. It's the same thing, but the same thing in terms of the Supreme. Prabhupada goes on long explanations from 50 different directions. Why does the wind blow? Where does the wind come from? Where does the air come from? So behind the events, without going into it, behind the events within nature, there's the source of nature. Where's the air? The air is blowing in the sky. Where's the sky come from? The air is blowing within, and so forth and so on. So according to Bhagavad Gita, we know of Krishna's presence because he's all pervasive through his energies. Because he is all pervasive through his energies, things exist. We can infer his existence by the existence of the energies, because otherwise, from where do the energies come? And why does the energy move? Like, why does the wind blow? You can give some, law of physics, warmth and cold, and air moves according from one direction, from heat to cold. So what causes the heat? You just keep going back and back. Where does everything come from? An inquisitive person can understand the presence of the soul and the presence of the Supreme by inference. Although with these eyes, I cannot see. Correct. Just like I can't see an electron. But I know that electrons exist. Not just because it says in my 8th grade science book, but it does things. So you give it a different name, a different language, or whatever, but whatever that is, here's what it does, by its symptoms. It's science. And there's spiritual science to understand the soul, although you can't see one.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So one question. So consciousness, subconsciousness, superconscious. Is this are related to one or superfined status, or what is our?
I don't understand the question. You want to know what's the difference between consciousness and superconsciousness?
Subconsciousness.
That's your question?
Yes.
Subconscious. There were three. Conscious, subconscious, and superconscious. You want a definition?
That is the question.
That is the question. Yeah, that is my question.
That's
what is
your
the
question.
differences?
So, different schools of thought will have something different to say about subconscious. Subconscious might mean, for some schools of thought, there's something going on within the mind, but I'm not perceiving that which is going on in the mind, and therefore it's subconscious. I'm not aware of it, but it's going on. So subconscious. So conscious and superconsciousness, there are different schools of thought with that. Conscious is this capacity for awareness. I don't know what an Oxford Dictionary definition is, but a simple capacity for awareness. through, generally speaking, through senses. We can perceive something through our senses because there's consciousness. There's the instrument for registering awareness of something. And then superconsciousness, some people think they want to become superconsciousness. But a more accurate definition, that's the supreme. If someone gets a little slice of superconsciousness, they may call it superconsciousness, but it's from superconsciousness. So the capacity can be, it's like different watts, light bulb, 40 watt, 60 watt, 80 watt, 100 watt. Same electricity, but there's different illumination capacity for a different watt bulb. But super consciousness really means the supreme. That's the fullness of super consciousness. And depending upon one's receptivity, or the removal of coverings of consciousness, one may get closer to the human capacity for higher consciousness, but never touch and equal the supreme. So that's what super consciousness means to me, is the supreme, or super soul, soul and super soul. And then subconsciousness, something that's going on in the mind, which one of the material energies, but I'm not tuned into it. I'm not seeing it, feeling it, experiencing it. But it's going on.
Yeah. So one more question is, after liberation, so still consciousness is going to continue with the soul?
Oh yeah. The soul continues, so consciousness continues.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu.
Up front.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, thank you for the wonderful class. So this is more a curiosity question, not directly related to the topic, but you showed a slide, Chinese, I think it was theory of places.
Yes.
So because you preach in China for many years, so generally I understand there is no religion there, but what are they taught in the sense, is it like atheism, because communism is more related to atheism, but I also heard that they are state-approved churches.
They have what?
State-approved churches, like
Yeah.
which the Chinese government approves. So what do the mass of the people follow, and what do they think in terms of?
Well, there's government doctrine, and then there's the people. And they don't always have a one-to-one match. And the government, when something that is religion starts to manifest, they get their sledgehammer out and try to stop it. So, Confucianism is broad. Buddhism, broad. But many people who claim to be Buddhists or followers of Confucianism, because in China there are 5 recognized religions. Those are 2 of the 5. Most people that claim to be Buddhists are not Buddhists. They don't really know what Buddhism is, period. But it's a notion. And with that notion comes things like ahimsa, nonviolence, being vegetarian. And then there's different ideas amongst those who are Buddhists in China who have different understandings what vegetarian means. But it's a principle of living where there's respect of life, and basically a principle of a life of goodness, emphasis on the life of goodness. It's ethics and value systems that people hold. Confucianism is very similar. Very similar. There's an overlap of those things that are very similar with the life of Vaishnavism. There's also a mode of goodness, strong manifestation in the teachings and the practice of mode of goodness like behaviors for Vaishnava. But so the main distinction is, where does it all come from? And where is everything going to? Shh. Shh. Where's it all going to? What's the source of everything? And when everything is kaput, where does it go to? Sankhya can give an answer, but they don't really have Sankhya. Buddhism doesn't have Sankhya. It's social conduct, organizing society in such a way that people aren't aggressive, and they're the direction of the mode of goodness, as opposed to, or in contrast to, passion and ignorance. That's spiritual. Largely, frankly.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. This topic really interests me, and I was just wondering, like, if I want to be friends with someone, I have to have a common friend, and I can think of this as a very similar, where like soul wants to connect with another soul using via super soul. Like, can you give us some examples where this has happened, where soul from Bhagavad Gita or from Bhagavatam, where this has happened, a soul connected to another soul using super soul? And what would be the need for something like that when I can connect with super soul? Like, why would I want to connect with other souls?
Well, as an example, it's really easy. Narada Muni. So Narada Muni is uncanny. He just knows when to show up because he's connected to Super Soul. He just knows when to show up at the right time and say the right thing and help somebody that's stuck get unstuck, or resolve something in a very uncanny way. He's Super Soul connected. Because he's Super Soul connected, he's able to have a soul-to-soul relationship with people that he hasn't been with yet. But it's already there because he's Super Soul connected. And again and again and again, he does stuff like that. Just like this example with King Chitraketu, because that's one example, but there's so many. His son died. The son died, it's a long story. The son died because the king had married so many queens, wanting a son, but there was no son, so he married another queen and married another queen. Huge number of queens. And he wasn't having a son. Anyway, one son was born. The co-wives were so envious because now the king's attention goes completely to that one wife that produced a son, and they were being neglected, so they poisoned the boy. Envy. And Narada came at the right time. The boy's dead. The mother is distressed. The father is distressed. Narada's on the scene, knowing what to say, and helps King Chitraketu become enlightened king. Before, he was just an attached fellow. Nice fellow, but attached, blindly attached. So, there's an example. Soul-to-soul relationship through the B media, super soul. Anything else? Okay. I think we're going to end. It's 8 o'clock. So, can we have another little